Can a cartoon be so offensive, so disturbing, and so reckless that it never should have escaped the studio? These were not innocent animated experiments. They were banned, protested, hated by creators, attacked by critics, and in some cases, dragged into legal trouble. Today, we're counting down the adult cartoons that pushed animation past the breaking point, from cult classics to disasters people still argue about today. And number one may be the film that changed animation forever. Number 15, Midori, 1992. Some cartoons shock you with jokes. This one shocks you with misery. Midori, also known as Shoujo Tsubaki, is not the kind of animated film people casually recommend. It is the kind they whisper about like a cursed object from underground cinema. Written and directed by Hiroshi Harada, the film adapts Suehiro Maruo's controversial manga into a nightmare about a young orphan pulled into a cruel circus world where innocence is crushed by exploitation, humiliation, and psychological horror. What makes Midori so disturbing is not just its content, but the way it was made. Harada reportedly struggled to find producers, then spent years creating the film independently, giving it the feeling of something handmade, obsessed over, and almost forbidden. Its limited animation, painted stillness, and suffocating carnival atmosphere make it feel less like entertainment and more like a warning. This is animation stripped of comfort, and maybe pushed too far. Number 14, Violence Jack, 1986. This was not animation trying to entertain. It was animation trying to survive the apocalypse. Violence. Jack comes from the wild imagination of Go Nagai, the same creator whose work often smashed through the polite boundaries of manga and anime. Beginning with its first OVA in 1986, the series throws viewers into a destroyed Kanto region where society has collapsed. Gangs rule the ruins, and one monstrous anti-hero walks through the chaos like a punishment from the wasteland itself. The shocking part is how far the anime was willing to go with brutality, fear, and social breakdown. Instead of using violence as simple action, Violence Jack turns the world into a moral sewer where survival has replaced civilization. Its later OVA entries became even more infamous, facing censorship problems internationally, with one entry reportedly banned in Australia. It may be influential, but it also feels like a challenge. How much darkness can animation carry before it becomes unbearable? Number 13, Urotsuki Doji, Legend of the Overfiend, 1987. Few animated titles damaged the idea of cartoons are for kids as aggressively as this one. Urotsuki Doji, Legend of the Overfiend, began as an adult horror fantasy anime adaptation of Toshio Maeda's manga, with the first OVA appearing in 1987. On paper, it sounds like a supernatural apocalypse story. Hidden worlds, ancient prophecies, demons, man-beasts, and a cosmic being powerful enough to reshape existence. But its reputation was built on something much more controversial: the way it fused horror, fantasy, adult content, and extreme imagery into a spectacle that many audiences were completely unprepared for. Internationally, it became one of the titles people pointed to when discussing the most notorious side of imported adult anime. The theatrical and home video versions faced edits, ratings battles, and censorship in multiple regions. As a piece of animation history, it is impossible to ignore. As a viewing experience, it is exactly why this list exists. Number 12, King Dick, 1975. Some cartoons push boundaries with satire. This one pushed them with pure, shameless adult chaos. King Dick, also known as Il Nano e la Strega, came from the same 70s explosion that followed the scandalous success of Fritz the Cat, when producers around the world suddenly believed animation could be sold as forbidden entertainment for grown-ups. This Italian-French adult cartoon turns fairy tale fantasy into a crude, bawdy, adults-only parody filled with witches, curses, royal absurdity, and deliberately tasteless humor. It was not trying to be elegant, emotional, or respectable. It was trying to prove that animated films could enter the same exploitation market as live-action adult cinema. That ambition brought censorship trouble, cuts, and an X-rated reputation in some markets. But the real story is how rough and desperate it feels. The animation is uneven, the comedy is blunt, and the whole film carries the energy of a movie made to cash in on controversy before the trend disappeared. King Dick belongs here because it shows the ugly side of adult animation's early rebellion. Once cartoons became for adults, some filmmakers stopped asking what animation could express and started asking what they could get away with. Number 11. Do It! Yasuji's Pornorama, 1971. This is the kind of animated experiment that feels less like a movie and more like a prank pulled on the audience. Do It! Yasuji's Pornorama came from Japan's early wave of adult animation, when artists were pushing cartoons into areas mainstream viewers never expected. Based on the transgressive manga style of Yasuji Tanioka, the film built its identity around chaos, rude gags, aggressive humor, strange body-focused comedy, social absurdity, and a deliberately ugly energy that seemed designed to make polite audiences uncomfortable. Unlike later anime that would polish adult themes into sleek fantasy or horror, this film feels raw, jagged, and almost proudly unpleasant. That is part of its historical importance. It shows a moment when Japanese animation was not only chasing beauty or fantasy, but also testing vulgarity, satire, and anti-commercial weirdness. The problem is that shock without emotional control can become exhausting. Viewers looking for story may find noise. Viewers looking for art may find provocation. But as a time capsule, it is fascinating. It proves adult animation did not simply arrive. It stumbled, shouted, offended, and left a mess behind. Number 10. Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. A beautiful nightmare is still a nightmare, and Belladonna of Sadness may be one of animation's most haunting examples. Created during Japan's experimental Animorama period, this film looks nothing like a normal cartoon. It feels closer to a moving painting, filled with watercolor imagery, medieval tragedy, psychedelic design, and long stretches that drift like a dream, turning poisonous. The story follows a woman crushed by cruelty and power, then pulled into a dark transformation that mixes folklore, rebellion, desire, and revenge. What makes it so controversial is not cheap shock, but emotional violence. The film is visually gorgeous, yet the world inside it is brutal, unfair, and deeply unsettling. It was not built to comfort viewers. It was built to challenge them, disturb them, and maybe even accuse them. Commercially, it struggled, but over time it became a cult art house legend, praised for its daring and feared for its intensity. Some adult cartoons chase scandal with crude jokes. Belladonna of Sadness earns its reputation through beauty, pain, and a mood so heavy it almost stains the screen. Number 9. Cleopatra, 1970. Before anime became a global empire, it had a strange phase where history, science fiction, and adult satire collided in total confusion. Cleopatra is one of the boldest examples. Connected to Osamu Tezuka, the legendary creator behind Astro Boy, the film shocked people precisely because it came from a creative world many associated with innocence, imagination, and family-friendly storytelling. But this was not a sweet historical adventure. It was part of the Animorama experiment, mixing ancient Egypt, time travel, comedy, politics, pop art visuals, and adult situations into a film that often feels like it is changing genres every few minutes. One moment it wants to be epic, the next it becomes parody, then suddenly it turns surreal. That unevenness is exactly why it remains so fascinating and so strange. Cleopatra shows a studio trying to prove animation could compete with adult live-action cinema, but also struggling to decide whether it wanted to be art, satire, spectacle, or provocation. It may not fully work, but it absolutely matters. It is animation history with no breaks and no clear, safe exit. Number 8. 1001 Nights, 1969. The adult animation boom did not begin with a roar. It began with a glittering, risky experiment that dared viewers to rethink cartoons completely. 1001 Nights was one of Japan's major attempts to create animation specifically for mature audiences, long before global anime fandom understood how wide the medium could become. Inspired by the legendary Arabian Nights tales, the film mixed fantasy adventure, romance, satire, and adult themes into a lavish animated spectacle. What made it stand out was ambition. It was not simply trying to be shocking. It wanted to prove that animation could carry sensuality, politics, comedy, danger, and visual experimentation all at once. Its colors, strange transitions, and stylized characters give it the feeling of a storybook that has been pulled into a nightclub dream. But that same boldness also made it difficult to categorize. Was it high art, commercial adult entertainment, or a cultural experiment that overshot its target? That uncertainty is its legacy. 1001 Nights opened doors, but it also proved those doors led into some very uncomfortable rooms. Number 7. Once Upon a Girl, 1976. Fairy tales were supposed to be bedtime stories. Then this film dragged them into a courtroom and put innocence on trial. Once Upon a Girl is one of the strangest artifacts from the 70s adult animation craze, built around a bizarre framing device where Mother Goose faces an obscenity trial. From there, the film turns familiar fairy tales into adult parodies, using classic storybook names as a mask for crude humor and exploitation-era shock. The idea itself sounds like something designed to attract controversy before anyone even watched it, and that is the problem. Unlike the more ambitious adult cartoons that tried to mix satire with social commentary, Once Upon a Girl often feels like it exists mainly to test the patience of censors and curiosity seekers. Its animation has a rough, uneven quality, and its pacing can feel more like a collection of sketches than a fully shaped movie. Still, it belongs on this list because it captures the opportunistic side of the adult cartoon boom. When Fritz the Cat proved cartoons could shock adults and sell tickets, films like this rushed in asking one dangerous question: how low could the bar go? Number 6. Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle, 1975. This was not just a parody, it was a legal problem wearing a loincloth. Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle took the Tarzan legend, twisted it into a crude adult cartoon, and then discovered that famous fictional icons are not always safe targets. The film's original identity leaned so heavily into its jungle hero spoof that the estate of Edgar Rice Burroughs objected, forcing title and character name changes in some releases. That legal trouble only added to the film's underground reputation. But beyond the lawsuit tension, the movie itself is a perfect example of 70s animation chasing the adult market with wild confidence and very little discipline. Its humor is blunt, its visual style is strange, and its attitude is proudly tasteless. For some cult viewers, that makes it a rebellious artifact. For others, it makes it exactly the kind of cartoon that should have stayed locked in a drawer. The film is historically interesting because it shows how quickly adult animation moved from political satire into exploitation parody. It did not just push boundaries, it crashed into them, laughed, and kept running. Number 5. Coonskin, 1975. Some films are controversial because they fail. Others are controversial because people still cannot agree what they were trying to do. Ralph Bakshi's Coonskin may be the most explosive example on this list. Mixing live action with animation, the film used caricature, crime story energy, and brutal satire to attack racist stereotypes, Hollywood exploitation, organized crime, and American hypocrisy. But the method was so aggressive that many viewers saw the imagery before they could process the critique. Protests, outrage, distribution problems, and public backlash followed, turning the film into one of Bakshi's most debated works. Supporters argue that it is a fearless act of protest art, deliberately using ugly stereotypes to expose the ugliness behind them. Critics argue that the film's imagery is so harsh and loaded that its message becomes almost impossible to separate from its shock value. That tension is exactly why Coonskin remains so difficult to discuss. It is not disposable trash, but it is not easy defense either. It is a dangerous film about dangerous imagery, and it proves that satire can become a fire even its creator cannot fully control. Number 4. Down and Dirty Duck, 1974. After one X-rated cartoon made history, everyone seemed to think the next scandal was just one dirty duck away. Down and Dirty Duck arrived during the adult animation gold rush that followed Fritz the Cat, and it carried the unmistakable smell of a movie trying to cash in on controversy. Built around a mild-mannered office worker whose life spirals into bizarre adult chaos after meeting a reckless talking duck, the film aimed for counterculture madness, crude comedy, and anti-establishment energy. But unlike Bakshi's sharper work, this one often feels more desperate than dangerous. The shock is there, the adult branding is there, the rebellious attitude is there, but the bite feels weaker. Even its promotional identity leaned into the idea of being forbidden, despite confusion around whether it was officially rated or simply marketed that way. That makes it historically interesting, because it shows how quickly adult cartoon became a selling point rather than an artistic mission. Down and Dirty Duck is not remembered as a great breakthrough. It is remembered as evidence that once animation learned how to shock, some filmmakers forgot it also needed a reason. Number 3. Heavy Traffic, 1973. This cartoon did not want to make audiences laugh. It wanted to drag them into the dirt of the city and make them breathe it. Ralph Bakshi's Heavy Traffic arrived after Fritz the Cat, but instead of simply repeating the same counterculture shock, it turned inward, darker, meaner, and more personal. The film follows Michael Corleone, not the gangster from The Godfather, but a lonely young cartoonist trapped between family dysfunction, street violence, fantasy, and the ugly pressure of urban life. Bakshi mixes animation with live-action textures, pinball machine imagery, grotesque character designs, and raw New York energy, creating a world that feels dirty, loud, and emotionally bruised. What makes Heavy Traffic controversial is not only its adult content, but its bitterness. It treats the city like a machine that chews up dreams, bodies, families, and ambition. There is satire here, but it is not clean satire. It is angry, vulgar, uncomfortable, and sometimes deliberately ugly. For some viewers, that ugliness made it powerful. For others, it made the film feel like animation had been weaponized against taste itself. Either way, Heavy Traffic proved adult cartoons could be more than raunchy jokes. They could be psychological street wounds drawn in ink. Number 2. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat, 1974. When a controversial cartoon becomes famous, the sequel does not always continue the revolution. Sometimes it just sells the ashes. The 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat tried to ride the shockwave left behind by the original, but without Ralph Bakshi's involvement and without Robert Crumb's approval, it felt like a strange imitation wearing the skin of a scandal. The film follows Fritz through a series of fantasy lives and hallucinated scenarios, jumping from one outrageous idea to another with the loose logic of a bad trip. On paper, that structure could have worked. After all, adult animation thrives on surreal freedom. But here, the freedom often feels directionless. Instead of the original's sharp attack on counterculture hypocrisy, politics, ego, and rebellion, this sequel leans harder into shock, crude humor, and psychedelic weirdness. It became infamous not because it expanded the character, but because it proved how quickly controversy can become a cheap formula. Fritz was once a symbol of animation breaking out of the children's room and crashing into adult culture. In this sequel, he becomes something more hollow, a mascot for exploitation-era excess. The mini-conclusion is brutal but fair. This is what happens when a cultural grenade gets turned into a brand. Number 1. Fritz the Cat, 1972. This is the cartoon that kicked down the door, offended almost everyone, and changed animation history, whether people liked it or not. Fritz the Cat was not just another adult comedy. It was the first animated feature in the United States to receive an official X rating, and that fact alone turned it into a cultural bomb. Directed by Ralph Bakshi and based on Robert Crumb's underground comic character, the film follows Fritz, a selfish, womanizing, drug-using, college-age cat wandering through protest culture, racial tension, fake revolution, and spiritual emptiness. The genius and the problem are almost the same thing. The film wanted to expose the ugliness beneath the counterculture, but it did so with imagery and behavior so harsh that even Crumb reportedly hated the adaptation. Audiences came for the forbidden cartoon, but what they got was something nastier, sharper, and more cynical than expected. It mocked idealism, masculinity, politics, rebellion, and the fantasy that youth culture was automatically pure. Some call it groundbreaking, others call it mean-spirited trash, but no one can honestly call it unimportant. Fritz the Cat proved animation could be adult, profitable, controversial, and dangerous. And once that door opened, cinema never fully closed it again. So, were these cartoons bold artistic rebellions, or proof that animation sometimes goes too far? Some changed cinema forever, some chased controversy for cash, and some still feel dangerous to even discuss. But one thing is clear, once cartoons stopped being innocent, there was no going back. Comment your pick, like the video, and subscribe for more forbidden film history.